I'm going to share a land acknowledgement with you now. Even as we gather virtually, it is important that each and every one of us respectfully acknowledges and recognizes the ancestral treaty and unceded territories of all of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples that call our respective lands home. From coast to coast to coast, we deeply appreciate the historic connection of all Indigenous peoples to these lands. We acknowledge the unique and sacred relationship with Indigenous peoples that Indigenous peoples have with the land, water, and all living creatures, and their role in protecting the earth since the beginning. We must be grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and meet here, and thank all the generations of people who have been stewards of these lands for thousands of years. As Canadian Muslim women, we are committed to confronting historical and ongoing colonialism and violence against Indigenous communities, and joining in solidarity with Indigenous communities in a spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. Now I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about who we are. CCMW is an organization dedicated to the equality, equity, and empowerment of Muslim women in Canada, and it was founded in Winnipeg, Manitoba in 1982 by the late Dr. Lila Falman and a group of determined Muslim women who sought to channel their passion for faith-centered social justice work and create a more inclusive Canada for all. CCMW promotes Muslim women's identity in the Canadian context and encourages mutual understanding between Canadian Muslim women and women of other faiths. CCMW is a registered charity with 17 chapters across Canada, comprised of Canadian Muslim women and girls of diverse age, ethnicity, sexuality, and ability. CCMW continues to protect the rights of Canadian Muslim women and girls through active advocacy against systemic racial and intersectional social injustices, and we take great pride on our commitment to the diversity of our communities and inclusion of all individuals that wish to participate in our programs, regardless of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, marital status, family status, or disability. I'd like to now introduce you to our Dare 2 team. Firdaus Ali, our Dare 2 manager, and Jasmine Ali Rami, and assisting us today on the technology side are Zainab Jamal, and I don't think we have Iman here, but Zainab is with us, who are supporting in the logistics of the project. I'll turn it over to Firdaus to share some information with all of you. Firdaus, over to you.
Thank you, Nuzhat. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and good afternoon, good evening. Really happy to be amidst all of you wonderful people. And you have taken the time on this Saturday evening to be with us. And I'm sure that you will find the workshop useful as we go along. So just a little bit about our project. So the workshop series is part of our Digital Anti-Racism Education 2 project, kindly funded by the Government of Canada. It is basically an expansion on phase 1, which we had in the year 2020. It is actually a program or a project that brings together diverse communities to kind of open the conversation around hate, around racism, around Islamophobia. And, you know, when we applied for this grant 2-3 years ago, we did know that Islamophobia is an issue within our communities, and an organization like CCMW can be that ally in opening that conversation. But little I think did we know 2 years later that Islamophobia is going to impact our lives so intensely as we have seen it. Today is our 4th workshop on anti-Islamophobia, and I can't tell you that every week we've had at least one incident of hate or a hate attack in someone, from someone in our communities, impacting one province or the other. So I'm happy that you're engaging on this conversation. Our workshops are based on Train the Trainer model. So hopefully you will be attending today, but also attending the Countering Cyber Hate workshop next week, which is on July 24th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. EST. And all those attending both workshops will receive a certificate in digital anti-racism education. And we don't want you to end here. We want you to take the workshop. We want you to enjoy the nuances and the intensities that this workshop allows you to, but really to take this workshop into your own inner communities. So you may be part of an organization, maybe a mosque, or maybe a school or university. And this is an important dialogue to be had with everybody, especially in today's times. My grandson was born a few weeks ago, and the fear that I felt for him to be a Muslim in Canada, and I feel that projects like these really open that conversation. It kind of makes us rally against things that are most important to us, and I feel that besides the learning, one thing that I would like to leave you all with is that do not be bystanders to hate. Sometimes we have seen hate, racism happen. If it doesn't happen to us, we are silent about it. We kind of are these silent bystanders. So I appeal to you all that, with this workshop, let it be an engaging conversation that we will have. And today is our English workshops. We do have 2 workshops in French that will happen in August. We just had to reschedule it. More information will be on our website and our social media channels. So again, I thank you, and I thank Nuzat and our presenters, as well as Jasmine, Iman, and Zainab for helping us with this project. And we will be taking questions as we go along. So feel free to post questions during the workshop. Can we just proceed to the, I'll just hand it over to Jasmine to explain the ground rules to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Firdaus. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's nice to have so many people here join us on a Friday night. So that's really nice to see. So just a couple of ground rules just for the breakout rooms more so. So acknowledging multiple viewpoints and opinions, owning your intentions and impact, step back. So if you feel like you're taking up a lot of space in the breakout rooms, that's fantastic, but it's also best to encourage other folks to speak as well. Recognizing your own privileges and honoring the different experiences we bring into this space. Challenging each other with care and empathy. And finally, please put your questions into the chat box. So the chat box has been enabled for you to only message the host. And Firdaus has renamed herself questions. So if you're able to, please forward questions to Firdaus, and she'll forward them to Amira. And whenever we get a break during the session, we'll be able to ask those questions. Right, so before we get started with the session itself, we have a quick pre-survey for you guys all to do. So if you could open up another tab on your computer, another kind of on your device, and go to www.menti.com. And I will paste that into the chat as well. And once you get there, the code will be 4425-5223. That's also in the chat. So this is essentially a very short informal pre and post workshop survey. This will be treated confidential and will not be linked to you in any way. And they'll be summarized in aggregate form to help us plan for future workshops and to include into our report. So great. So essentially Mentimeter is like a word cloud. So people will kind of put in their answers, and the larger the words appear, that means the more people have kind of responded with that answer. So a lot of folks joining from Calgary, Toronto, London, welcome. We have people from Pickering, Ajax, Brampton, Hamilton, Montreal, Richmond Hill, Maple, Laval, that's in Quebec, I think. Halifax, amazing. Oshawa. Ottawa, mashallah. I'm so happy to have so many folks from different areas join us today. Right, so I am attending the workshop today as are you a chapter member with TCMW, a volunteer, a community resident, decision maker, so a politician or so forth, representative of an organization or other. So we have an even distribution, a lot of folks from chapters. So in one word, tell us why you decided to join the Dare 2 training sessions. It's education, knowledge, empowerment, solidarity, advocacy, allyship. Exhausted, interesting. Gaining knowledge, growth, learn, activism, empathy, energize, help, fear, contribution, listen. So do you identify as a Muslim? This session is open for Muslims and non-Muslims, but this kind of helps us get an understanding of the people joining us today. So how informed are you on Islamophobia and what it looks like along with the statistics in Canada? Right, so majority of people being somewhat informed or well informed. So do you know someone, including yourself, who has experienced Islamophobia? And this can be physical, verbal, any form really. Right, so a lot of folks saying yes. So if you personally experienced or witnessed Islamophobia, do you know how to kind of proceed? Do you know the resources available or the help available as well? And do you know what acts would be considered Islamophobic? Yep, so a lot of people saying yes or sort of. And do you know how and where to report incidences of Islamophobia? Right, so a lot of people being between not sure, not so sure, and sort of. And do you know how to navigate support services to seek counseling and other ways for help? Right, so kind of an even distribution amongst the three. And do you know what to do as a bystander witnessing something that is Islamophobic? Okay, so most people saying sort of, along with yes, and some not so sure. Okay, great. That concludes the pre-workshop survey. Thank you all so much for completing that. And let's get Amira to share her screen. Amazing, and I'll pass it over to Nizat to introduce our facilitator today.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm pleased this afternoon to introduce you to Amira Al-Ghawabi. She's going to be the facilitator for this particular workshop. Amira is a journalist and human rights advocate. Many of you may know her from her writings and advocacy for our communities. That work includes stories and commentary for CBC Radio, the Ottawa Citizen, Maclean's, The Walrus, the Literary Review of Canada, and the Globe and Mail. She's currently a contributing columnist for the Toronto Star and Press Progress. Amira spent 5 years promoting civil liberties of Canadian Muslims at the National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM, between 2012 to the fall of 2017. Currently, Amira is involved with several initiatives to promote civic engagement in diverse communities, including as a founding board member of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and the Silk Road Institute. She will be leading all of us today, and we thank her for her time and commitment to help us through our learning journey. Before I turn it over to Amira, I wanted to acknowledge that we have Councillor Ashwin Khan attending, I believe from Edmonton, so welcome, Councillor. Over to you, Amira. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Nushat. Thanks to everyone who is here. It is indeed wonderful to see such a great, significant number of participants. Not a Friday night, Jasmine, it's Saturday night, but it's okay. It's a weekend night. So to have this great number of participants, it's fantastic. And really, really looking forward to an interactive session with all of you. Okay, so let's get started. So we do have a lot to go through today. We're going to look at Islamophobia, gendered Islamophobia, intersectional identities, confronting this. We'll have a break, we'll unpack hate, look at some laws, how to advocate for change, and then taking action in our community. So we are going to get started here. Now, of course, some of the content is a bit disturbing for sure. So please do feel free to take breaks throughout the workshop. And it's important to note that we have a support resource list available that will be put into the chat. So if anyone needs to talk to someone or have any type of support, that is available to you, inshallah. Okay, so before we begin, Bismillah, let us take a moment of silence and remembrance for the Afzal family, who we lost in tragic circumstances in a horrific act of hate and terrorism on June 6th. So to begin, let's center our intentions to really serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the knowledge, serving our communities and remembering what this is all for. And it really is to confront the type of hatred that has taken away this family from us and from their family. May God have mercy on their souls. Okay, so we're going to jump into talking about Islamophobia. And when we get into this topic, it's a term that we talk often about. It's the way that many Canadian Muslims will describe the biases, the discrimination they feel. But we're going to really get into this term. And to do that, we're going to use terminology like myth. What is a myth? It's an unfounded or false notion. And we're going to talk about stereotypes. So a stereotype is an incorrect assumption based on things like race, color, ethnic origin, place of origin, religion. Typically involves attributing the same characteristics to all members of a group, regardless of their individual differences. It is often based on misconceptions, incomplete information, and or false generalizations. So keep all of this in mind. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play for all of you audio tape of a phone call that came into the National Council of Canadian Muslims years ago when I worked there. And I'll set the sort of context for this phone call. As many of you will remember, around 2015, there was a lot of discussion about bringing Syrian refugees to Canada. We were in the midst of a federal election as well, in which at the time, Stephen Harper, who was the Prime Minister, was making a lot of issue with the idea of women wearing a niqab and the citizenship oath. So that was prominent in headlines, as was talking about how many refugees Canada could take. It was an election issue. And we received this phone call to the office. And so I'm going to play the phone call. And the reason is as you're listening to this caller, you are going to pick up on myths and stereotypes about Muslims and Islam that this caller goes through. And what we're going to do after the phone call, and after you've kind of hopefully taking notes on a notepad or on your computer, we're going to have breakout session where we use a Jamboard and put some of these myths and stereotypes up on the Jamboard. You'll see how we'll do it, and talk through what is this caller expressing. And I'm sure you're not going to be too surprised, but what is interesting is how many myths and stereotypes we get into this one call. So I'm going to play this right now. Give me 1 second. Sorry, here. Yeah. Give me a second. All right, give me 1 second. Of course, I'm gonna have a bit of technical issues sometimes. Give me 1 moment. After I've gotten everyone excited to hear the call. So just 1 moment. So I'm having trouble with it. I'll try one more time and then I'll get one of our tech team to pick up if I'm not able to make this work. No, it's not working for me. Jasmine or Firdaus, can you try to
I can open it up and see?
Thank you, please. Thanks.
Yes, good afternoon. Just calling to express our grave concern with allowing these Syrian Islamic Muslims into Canada. I believe that there is good people mixed in with the bad, but you always have to err on the side of caution. And we do not want not one Syrian refugee into Canada. And that whole Islam is a flawed religion, a dangerous religion. It is the only religion where terrorists come from. And I do not want that to be my future Canada. They can stay in their own country and live the way they want, wear their headdresses, wear their hijabs, and they can change laws in their own country. Our laws are based on Christian, Judeo-Christian values and morals and standards. And our family immigrated in the early 1900s. When they came here, they had to pick rock, dig roots, clear land. And you know, these here immigrants that come now, they come and they want a free car, a free house, handouts. These Syrians, they're coming here with nothing except their hands out, their mouths open, and just to be a drain on our society. This is taxpayer money, and I hope this dumb Trudeau listens to the Canadian people when we say no to refugees, these Syrians. There's lots of other refugees from a lot of parts of the world where there is no Muslims and no Islamic people that they can bring in and help from the Ukraine, from other parts of impoverished countries that would want to come here and adapt, not change our laws. You know that hijab and headdresses? That's men made that up in that country. It's a sign of oppression. And when I see that as a white person, I see the woman is oppressed, is what I see. No to Syrian refugees. And for that fact, Muslims and Islamic people as well. We have enough of them. I'm starting to be that we feel like we're in their country. We're an immigrant, you know, here. There's so many of them everywhere you go. Stay in your own country, keep your beliefs, keep your religion.
End of message. To delete this message, press.
So as you heard from this caller, and she could have kept going. So the only reason she stopped was because the answering machine wasn't giving her more space. So lots of stereotypes in there, lots of myths. Hope you were all taking notes. What we're going to do is we're going to do a jam board right now. And so what you're going to find is you're going to break out into groups. You're going to, these are the groups that you're going to be with throughout today's session. So we're going to have several times where we do have these breakout sessions. You'll get to sort of have a conversation with a few other participants. And so we're going to do that right now for about 10 minutes to go through the myths and stereotypes here. And then we're going to unpack them all together. So see you in your groups.
Great, thanks so much, Amira. I'll just share my screen. So I'll send over a link to the Jamboard into the chat now. And the cool thing about Jamboard's kind of an interactive website where you can kind of paste your thoughts. And so you'll arrive to this page here. And depending on which breakout room you're in, so for example, this slide is breakout room 1. We just go to the arrow above and click on the right hand kind of corner and go to the different pages. And so to kind of paste your sticky note, you just click on the fourth icon on your left and just type in your thoughts and feedback and that everyone can see. If you're not able to access the Jamboard, have any technical difficulties, maybe we can have one person in each breakout room be assigned to share their screen, and folks can verbally say what they feel and any feedback they have. Great, so I'll open up the breakout rooms now. Hi there, were you able to enter into a breakout room?
No, I'm
Okay, no problem.
having troubles connecting here. I keep getting booted off. I'm trying to get in on my computer, but it's giving me problems. I've been on my phone doing this, and I think that's the reason why.
Oh, maybe. I just sent another request. Hi there, are you able to join a breakout room?
Okay, so we're just coming back now from the breakout sessions. And so we're just gonna, I think lots of people have been going through all of that was shared in that phone call. Very detailed phone call. The caller had a lot to say. So, so just look through what other, and certainly we see a lot of the same notes that people picked up on. So that's great. Great. So, so absolutely. I mean, this call, it's almost, I don't want to say it's a perfect call because it's a horrible call, but it's perfect in the sense that it really does set us up really well in terms of being able to now sort of go through what are some of these myths and stereotypes that really, while many of you that that were in my group talked about, this woman was clearly basing her attitudes on ignorance. But sadly, she's not an outlier. Sadly, it's not that there's not very many people who have these ignorant views, but that these are attitudes that are frequently out there. I do see a question from one of the participants. I don't see her name though. I see someone's hand up.
I think it's Linda, right?
I believe it was Linda.
Sorry, I forgot I put my hand up. I just wanted to make a comment for future breakout rooms. I know, and I was talking to a couple people that some of us couldn't access the Jamboard because it was saying there were too many people. So I don't know if there's a workaround that you can do, maybe like 2 different accounts. And the other thing is we were having difficulty figuring out what to do. And so, but in the chat in the breakout rooms, it's disconnected. So we couldn't communicate through chat either to reach out to any of the organizers. So if there's a way to maybe enable that for the breakout rooms or have an organizer in each of those rooms, that would be great. That's all. I just wanted to share that.
That's great. No, thank you so much. We were commenting in our breakout room that we can't wait till we're in person, and these technical glitches that will inevitably happen every time. But these are great points. Thank you, Linda. Okay, so we're going to go through the common myths versus the reality. So essentially, what we heard in that call really make up a lot of the stereotypes that people carry. So we're going to break them down one by one. So the idea of Muslims as a monolith, you heard that in her call, in this caller. She really, when she was talking about Muslims, it was, you could almost imagine her seeing a horde of people. They're all the same. They all look the same to her. There is no diversity. And that is, of course, versus the reality that, our communities are very diverse. And, I like to quote from Forrest Gump when he, says, when you open up a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. And this is actually really relevant because within our Muslim communities, diversities in our communities, there cannot be assumptions on people's religious practice, their ethnicity, their background, their cultural practices, etc. It is such a diverse community. And frequently, of course, as many of you know, there's always also an assumption due to, the prominence of stereotypes within pop culture that Muslims are all Arab, for instance. And as we know, as you can see just from this breakdown, that is not the case. Muslims come from around the world, the majority, in fact, from the Asia Pacific area. And as you see, sort of the breakdown in different parts of the world. The other common myth that we do see as part of the sort of Islamophobic narrative out there, and again, this is all really relevant for all of you as you consider doing this kind of information sharing, whether it's in your workplaces, whether it's in community groups, is that these types of myths, the idea that Muslims want to be separate, for instance, are things that people will hear in comments, calls, discussion groups, or see in discriminatory practices. And so we do need to unpack them and be able to counter them one by one. So the idea that Muslims want to be separate, you heard that in her call, that they want to, be by themselves and not necessarily integrate, right? And this is really, again, versus the truth of the matter, which is Muslim communities are interdependent with other faiths and cultures. There are shared values and aims, and there are enriching interactions between Muslim communities around the world. Another common Islamophobic narrative that you will hear is the idea that Muslim traditions are inferior. And you heard that when she talked about the idea of sort of a Judeo-Christian value system, and the way that she spoke about that was that, well, that is going to be a superior value system versus, the Muslim way of life. And again, this is versus the reality that Islam is distinctly different, but that difference does not mean that it is a deficient way of life, and it is equally as worthy of respect as any other faith tradition. This one is a big one, right? The women as oppressed. You heard that repeatedly in her call, the idea that hijab is a man-made rule, that when she sees it as a white woman, she sees a woman as oppressed is what she sees. And so this is a very common trope. And not only is it a very common trope, but it is a trope that has actually been used to justify war, and violence and colonialism and the colonial project and imperialism. And so it is a very dangerous narrative. And of course, it's versus the reality that women have their own agency and choice within Muslim traditions. And while we acknowledge that there will be areas where women are coerced into wearing the hijab, and this does occur, it is not part and parcel of Islamic tradition that this will be done in cultural practices, and that we would always condemn coercion of any kind. So this is important. Violence. So everyone picked up on the idea that the caller made was that, oh, well, Islam is the only religion where terrorists come from. So, where does she get that kind of idea? Well, later in the presentation, we're going to talk about the disproportionate media coverage of quote unquote Muslim terrorism. And so absolutely, if you just look at just, these kinds of examples of magazine covers, and sadly, there's so many examples, one of them from a European magazine, Islam is raping Europe, why they hate us, the idea of, for instance, if there is any type of criminal activity done within any subset of a community, well, that means that the entire community is responsible for that. And then you will have that type of stereotype that the entire group is to bear responsibility and to bear blame. And of course, that's versus the reality that Muslims should be seen as actual or potential partners working for the benefit of all society and of all communities. So for instance, you have this quote from Pope Francis where he says, if I talk about Islamic violence, then I also have to talk of Catholic violence. not all Muslims are violent, just like not all Catholics are violent. And so it's such a logical thing. Like, it's actually pretty ludicrous that you need the Pope to have to say something like that, but it just speaks to the fact that these stereotypes exist and you do circulate. Another common trait, you didn't hear this one in her call, but if you do follow or watch some of the anti-Muslim bloggers and spaces online, the idea that Muslims are manipulative is a very common trope and narrative and myth. And that basically is that, you know, Muslims, even if they do say the right things about standing up for human rights and what have you, that deeply that they're actually trying to manipulate, you know, Western rules to eventually bring in Sharia, for instance. And she did actually talk about, you know, trying to bring in Sharia or having some kind of idea of not wanting, again, to integrate within the Western norms. And this is versus the reality that Islam is a genuine religious faith, and it is practiced sincerely by its adherents, just like any other religious faith. Rejection of criticism. This is another common myth or stereotype that within Muslim communities, that there is no tolerance for any type of criticism, particularly of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And of course, some of this is grounded in, you know, some of the criminal activities or terrorist activities that have been acted upon in the name of standing up for the Prophet Muhammad, where we saw the massacre of the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists in Paris several years ago. And we've had other kinds of terrorist activity committed against people who are expressing anti-Muslim views or what have you. But certainly that is not, again, to be cast upon the entire Muslim communities, because within a Muslim tradition, criticisms are considered and are debated, and certainly nothing would justify violence of any kind in that manner. So again, what these type of myths and stereotypes do is they create a sense that, well, Islamophobia therefore is justified based on all that we've just gone through, versus the idea that, you know, even critical views of Islam should be subjected to critique, lest they be inaccurate or unfair. So for instance, you know, one of the biggest things that you will hear about you know, concerns about talking about Islamophobia is that, oh, Islamophobia is meant to shut down critique of Islam, that this is really a way to silence criticism of Islam. That is, of course, not true, and it's not justifiable in that way. You can have critical views of Islam, but we can also debate those views, and Islamophobia is much, much deeper than simply not wanting to hear critical views. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind after we've gone through all of these myths and stereotypes is that there's actually an Islamophobia industry, and this is very unique to our communities. There's an industry in which, you know, and there's different numbers that are shown through various studies. But one study showed that between 2008 and 2011, $119 million in funding went to anti-Muslim groups that were pushing out these narratives through a variety of ways, whether it's through books, whether it's through public appearances, think tanks, whether it's through media engagement, what have you, often on, you know, networks like Fox News and sort of the usual suspects you would expect, that this industry is actually manufacturing hatred of Muslims, as indicated, for instance, on this book by Nathan Lean. And there are many, many, as I said, studies that have looked at this. And this is something quite unique to our communities. So when you think about some of the stereotypes that we've just gone through, the reality is that very many minority communities have gone through historical periods and even currently where they are being scapegoated. They are looked at as the other. They are being demonized. We know right now, for instance, the rise of hate against Asian Canadians throughout the pandemic. We know, of course, anti-Black racism. We, of course, know about anti-Indigenous racism, that there will be various types of stereotypes and myths put out about different communities. But again, what's quite unique is that there is an industry, there's money being pushed out to get these narratives about Muslims into people's minds and sort of, you know, scrolling through their Facebook feeds or what have you. And this is something unique. A really interesting book, though, for those of you who are curious to see where the parallels between the various stereotypes and myths about Muslims and other minority communities, a good book to read would be The Myth of the Muslim Tide by Doug Saunders. He published it several years ago, but it's still a very excellent sort of summary of the different types of stereotypes that have been shared across minority communities. Now, here in Canada, we do know that there is also an Islamophobia industry, and there's actually a research project being conducted currently by Professor Jasmine Zine. And so we are waiting for that to come out. So we don't have the numbers, we don't have the same type of information as they do in the United States in terms of sort of the scope of this industry, but we are hoping to get a better handle. So all of this brings us to what is a definition of Islamophobia, and there are many different ways to describe it, and I often point to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's definition because it's very simple. Racism, stereotypes, prejudice, fear, or acts of hostility directed towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. So it's a very easy definition. So when any of you who decide to train others or provide workshops about these things, I definitely recommend using this definition. Again, the definition itself becomes a source of contention, and sometimes we see that there are anti-Muslim or Islamophobic attacks against even the term Islamophobia. And so with the attack, for instance, on the Afzal family, and we saw all of the politicians come forward in condemning Islamophobia, we have to understand that within a few years ago, it was actually difficult to have all the political parties actually use the term Islamophobia because of the sort of all of the fog that was often sort of put around this term as a way to sort of quote unquote shut down free speech. But thankfully, we have finally come to a place where everyone has recognized that this is the term that describes the victimization of Muslim communities. And again, if you want to be able to describe exactly what we mean, this is a great definition. And this is a visual summary. It's from the Runnymede Trust. And the Runnymede Trust, by the way, is a UK-based organization that really did a lot of the pioneering work around defining Islamophobia. And so this visual summary, this is a kind of visual summary that you could actually use for any type of bias or discrimination. But it really does sort of help in your mind sort of imagine where are all the different places that Islamophobia can play out in our lives. And so, starting from the center and then moving out towards, I guess, sort of clockwise from the bottom. So prejudice, you can see prejudice against Muslim communities in the media and everyday conversation. You can see discrimination in the provision of services, education, health, housing, in employment practices. One of the most prominent places for these types of discrimination in this country at the moment with the state sanctioned discrimination is Bill 21 in Quebec, which we will talk about. You have exclusion from politics and government, from employment, from management responsibility. So a few months ago, for instance, when the Prime Minister appointed a new transport minister, Omar Ghabra, he was attacked because of his engagement in our communities. And so that was very Islamophobic, an effort to exclude our communities from participating, always trying to cast aspersions on our, the work of Muslim politicians and what have you. That's a very common effort to exclude. And then sort of the worst manifestation, sort of the extreme of this type of discrimination is the violence, the physical assaults, the vandalizing of property, the verbal abuse. And this diagram doesn't even show murder. Like, I don't think when the Runnymede Trust put this diagram together, like it occurred to them that there would be murder. But sadly, right here in Canada, just in the past 4.5 years, we've seen 3 tragic instances of murder, where Quebec City, the Toronto Mosque, and the stabbing of a volunteer caretaker, and then most recently in London, Ontario. And I hope that's the end of it. But certainly our recent activity and rise in anti-Muslim and Islamophobic incidents certainly leave many of us very worried and concerned about our safety. And so the other thing to keep in mind then is all of this leads to racial profiling as well. So the idea that different groups are going to be experiencing different types of discrimination. So this chart that you have in front of you is from an Ontario Human Rights Commission report called Under Suspicion a few years ago. It's very useful because it sort of shows you where the 5 sectors where racial profiling was reported to have taken place by select racial or ethnic backgrounds or creed groups. And this is based on people providing this information to the commission. One thing to note, and this is a very common, and it's something that really should irk all of us, is that there's often a lack of intersectionality in data. So what does that mean? It's like, as you see here, you have the group Black, Indigenous, Muslim, Arab or West Asian, South Asian. Well, you can hold multiple identities at the same time, and yet often it's not reflected in the data. And we'll talk about this more later. But for the purposes of now, you can see that people who said that they were racially profiled because of their Muslim identity specifically, you saw that happening most frequently in employment situations, in transportation. So for example, at borders, education, private business or retail service, or police. So again, these are the common places that people were reporting feeling that type of racial profiling and discrimination. Okay, a lot of this has been very heavy, especially for Saturday night, Jasmine. So we're gonna take a little bit of a comedic break to look at, what is racial profiling? How does that actually manifest, but with a little bit of a sort of a laugh kind of twist to it. So I'll let Jasmine set that up for us for a few minutes.
You're watching Channel 5 News.
Police are asking for more information on this man caught on a security camera last Thursday, suspiciously kneeled down beside a car next to a government building. The man is described as having brown skin, a beard of North African influence, and wielding a tire iron. Police aren't saying that this man is accused of any wrongdoing, but they would like to know what a man resembling certain people that threaten Western civilization was doing next to a government building. Further footage shows the man holding a large, unknown object and placing it on the car. The man also appears to be agitated and possibly swearing. Police are also asking for a passerby who interacted with the mechanically inclined bearded man to come forward with any further details. Footage shows that when interacting with the passerby, the suspect raises his hands, possibly a signal to co-conspirators, possibly to say, "I wasn't planting any bombs, stranger. Nothing to see here." The suspect then appears to hand over unknown objects to the passerby. The police do not believe the passerby is involved, but they would like to commend the man for interrupting whatever the bearded man was up to. Because soon after, the person of interest starts yelling what appears to be the word hell with a P on the end. Help! Help! Lead to speculation that English is a second language to him. If you have any information on an angry brown man who likes to wish hell on others in broken English, please contact police. Coming up next, is that guy at the public library working on his resume or taking orders from ISIS? Our experts teach you how to politely ask.
You're watching Channel 5 News.
Yeah, so racial profiling, it's well known enough that this hour has 22 minutes would actually create a skit about it, which is both sad and I guess a little bit amusing. So now just to sort of take a step back, and I alluded to this earlier, but what is really helpful to think about then when we're thinking about these various ways of racial profiling, discrimination, is how it almost can be seen on sort of a pyramid scale that shows you sort of what is sort of the majority of where views are, and how do we sort of get and escalate into more and more and more concerning acts of violence. And so this diagram from the Anti-Defamation League, what they call a pyramid of hate, which sounds horrible, really does sort of set a good sort of, again, image, a visual for us. So beginning at the bottom, where you have biased attitudes, you have the stereotyping, the insensitive remarks, the fear of differences. People mentioned in our breakout room that the caller that we heard earlier, you could hear that she was afraid, like she had fear, right? The non-inclusive language, microaggressions, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people, accepting negative or misinformation, screening out positive information. Another person in our breakout group talked about, seeing negative comments about refugees or immigrants on Facebook, trying to comment on those, trying to provide positive information instead, right? So the biased attitudes, that's sort of where you have like the vast majority of sort of those who hold these ignorant or racist views. Many of them will not go beyond these attitudes. They won't necessarily take it to a next step. But for those who do, here where we start to see the next step would be into the acts of bias. That's when you start to see the bullying, the ridicule, the name calling, slurs, epithets, social avoidance, dehumanization, biased, belittling jokes, right? And then you take it up a notch to discrimination. Then you have the economic discrimination. Just the other day, the European Union, I think, said that, you know, women who wear the hijab can be told that they cannot wear it anymore because it might cause workplace conflicts, right? Like unbelievable. Political discrimination, educational discrimination, employment, housing discrimination, segregation, criminal justice disparities, right? We know that here in Canada, the data, for instance, not only looking at, you know, racialized people generally who make up the overpopulation in our jails, we can break it down by Indigenous, by Black people, et cetera. Same with the child services. So these types of starting with the biased attitudes, you see how it can then work its way up into more and more serious impacts on people's lives. Then you get into the bias motivated violence. And that's what we've been seeing of late, where you have murder, you know, there can be rape, there can be assault, arson, terrorism, vandalism, desecration. We just had a mosque in Cambridge, Ontario a few days ago get vandalized. You have threats. You had a mother and her daughter being threatened in Hamilton last week. And then you get to, you know, and of course, you know, heaven, God forbid, but genocide, right? The act or intent to deliberately and systematically annihilate an entire people. And so, you know, and it's not beyond the pale. I mean, we're in Canada right now coming to grips with the reality that Indigenous communities experience genocide in this country, as we are learning about, you know, more and more about the impact and the horrific realities of the residential schools. So, you know, all of this is tied together in the dehumanization of communities. And so it's very helpful for us to sort of start to break it down this way, because sometimes, you know, if you start off right at the bottom where someone makes a joke about another community or based on stereotypes and say, well, it's just a joke, like, you know, get over yourself. No, it's not just a joke. It's part of a spectrum, and we have to, you know, stop it wherever we see it. So, so this is a good way to think about that. And then, of course, you know, as I mentioned earlier, in Canada, we had, you know, the most horrific, the worst massacre at a place of worship ever on Canadian soil, with the Quebec Mosque Massacre on January 29th, 2017. And as many of you, all of us know, a white supremacist terrorist entered the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City. He began shooting innocent Muslim worshippers. He murdered 6 men and injured 19 others. The murdered were Mamadou Taniberi, Azzedine Soufiane, Abdul Karim Hassan, Khalid Belkacemi, and Abu Bakr Thabti and Ibrahim Beri. And this individual who did this terrorist who did this, he was consumed by the hatred that he felt towards Muslims, and much of it was based on the stereotypes, the myths, the fear that he had of Muslims, based on what he was consuming. And so these are certainly not abstract to any of us. And then last fall, we saw, as I also mentioned earlier, we had a volunteer caretaker sitting outside a Toronto mosque, you know, helping with COVID precautions, and an individual came and stabbed him, and he died, killed him. And it's interesting to note that the Toronto police at the time said, you know, oh, this seems to have been a random stabbing. But in fact, after advocates did some research, they found that the accused was actually tied to neo-Nazi groups, satanic neo-Nazi groups. And so absolutely hate was a motivating factor here. And then, of course, most recently, the attack on the Afzal family. So again, these are the most extreme forms of Islamophobia. And what we want to do in the education that we're doing today, and the work that each of you are keen to do, and why you're here, is we want to get to these issues, these attitudes, way before they get to the point of destroying lives in the way that we've seen recently. We want to get to them, you know, right at the beginning, where the beginning of those biased attitudes, where we can counter those biased attitudes. So let's take another 10-minute in our breakout rooms, get a chance to talk with each other, and think about then, you know, what are some of the things, just reflecting now and having this time to look at the different types of Islamophobia, the impacts that it has, what are some of the ideas or things that you yourself are hoping to do in your own communities or with this training to start to counter some of this, or how are you feeling? Just to check in. Just this may be your first opportunity to share with others how you've been feeling. It's been a very heavy couple of months. So we'll do this breakout for 10 minutes and then we'll come back into the main session.
Hi, everybody.
Hello?
Hi there. Sorry, just moving folks into the breakout rooms right now. Just hang tight for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks everyone. Lots of reflections. I know in our breakout room, you know, people's minds are moving for sure. Like we're all thinking about a variety of things, and that will continue. So this is really great. Sort of pivoting now and talking about again where some of this type of these attitudes come from. Definitely, we know Islamophobia is perpetrated by the media. It is certainly a significant sort of source of information for people who don't necessarily have another opportunity to get to know Muslims in their day-to-day. Like in one of our breakout sessions, someone said, you know, if that caller had just known a Muslim in her life, maybe had gotten to talk to someone from our communities, maybe that would have been enough not to hold these views. I don't know if that's true, but certainly we know that studies have shown that more and more contact with different communities certainly does bring down the opportunity for the racist and biased and Islamophobic views. But until we can make sure that everybody gets to meet, you know, a person from every different community, the reality is that media is a great source, not a great source, but a significant source of information. And so, for instance, looking at the fact that terror attacks carried out by Muslims receive on average 357% more press coverage than those committed by non-Muslims, according to research conducted at Georgia State University. And this little factoid is just one of many. Like we can pull out so many similar factoids that just demonstrate that disproportionate focus on our communities when it comes to violence, and certainly feeds into that idea that, you know, Islam is the only religion where terrorists come from. I'm going to play a short video from an excellent source of information called Islamophobia Is, that also speaks to this point. So I'll start that right now. Oh, I'm going to get Jasmine to do it because today, I don't know, my computer's not working for me. So Jasmine, can you play this this video, please?
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Thank you.
So Amira, it's Nushat here, and hello everyone. I've just posted a link to a Healing and Wisdom Circle that we're holding tomorrow that's going to address the issue of fear, because we heard that in our breakout group, lots of people were talking about people feeling afraid and the fear, and I've heard that over and over again, and that's why we decided to hold this particular Healing and Wisdom Circle specifically on that topic. So if you're able to join us, I've provided a link for you to register for that. Please do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Jasmine, sorry, this is not the correct one. Sorry.
No worries. What's the title of it?
It's the one on media. So perpetuated by mainstream media. Yeah, that one. Thank you.
No problem.
Our news media exists to help us get a sense of our communities and the world at large. It does this by looking at the infinite number of things that are happening around the globe and chooses what to report, how to report, and how much to report. This means that all media, even when it's just straight reporting of facts, is political. But Islamophobia informs our mainstream media, meaning that the picture it's creating is distorted. This image is one that reinforces unfair biases about Islam and Muslims. An academic study on Canadian mainstream media confirms that violent acts committed by Muslims get far more news coverage than violent acts by white supremacists and right-wing extremists, even though the latter have been responsible for more deaths. So even though Muslim political violence has taken only 2 lives in Canada since 1960, the media is giving us a different story, leaving us in Canada always worried about the next act of so-called jihadi terrorism. And it's not just in the amount of coverage, but the type of coverage. Take these two front pages of the Globe and Mail. On the left, taken the day after the Boston Marathon bombing, and on the right, the day after the Quebec mosque shooting. The Quebec mosque shooting happened in Canada and was more fatal than the Boston Marathon bombing. But the headlines would have you believe another story. And so our mainstream media doesn't just deliver us the facts, it also strongly influences how we feel about the facts. In this case, by suggesting that Muslim lives aren't as important as non-Muslim ones. Now, take this terrorism timeline put together by Global News after the Quebec mosque shooting. The only other incidents mentioned on there are ones by Muslims, including one that wasn't even carried out. The timeline doesn't include some more fatal acts of violence, like the murder of 3 RCMP officers by right-winger Justin Bourque, or the murder of 14 women at l'École Polytechnique by Marc Lepine. So when people say that all terrorists are Muslim, it's because, well, we only call something terrorism if it was committed by Muslims. We rightly expect the mainstream media to be a truth teller, but Islamophobia and other biases mean that this isn't the case. Islamophobia in media leads us to overestimate the threat of Muslim violence and underestimate the threats against Muslims. This contributes to more Islamophobia. It's a vicious cycle. We need to rely on more honest sources of analysis and knowledge. At the same time, we also have to hold our mainstream media to account for perpetuating unfounded stereotypes about Muslims and Islam.
So thank you so much, Jasmine, for playing that. So that really does provide a very good analysis of the media. And so again, why this is so important is not only because of the underestimation of the violence against Muslims and the overestimation of violence by Muslims, but these also lead to the ways that public policy is made and perpetuated against our communities. And so laws that target Muslims in Canada, as we've seen, play a huge part in the role of systemic discrimination of Muslims in Canada. Some of these bills that we can mention, that we're mentioning today, are, for instance, Bill 21 and Bill C-51. So we'll just go through them very quickly. So the Anti-Terrorism Act, Bill C-51, that was passed by the Harper government in 2015, it was a bill that basically provided Canadian government agencies with more access to private data. They used national security as an excuse to breach human rights. The law is perceived as anti-constitutional and allows Muslims to become more susceptible to racial profiling under the guise of public safety. And it's very important to note that when you have the suspension or the overriding of certain communities' civil liberties, it really does impact other communities as well. So it's not only that it's concerning just to our communities, but it should be concerning to every single person in this country, because the overriding, or as I said, the undermining of our civil liberties will impact even more broadly. And then, of course, Islamophobia in Quebec, and getting to Bill 21. Bill 21 was sort of the final kind of stop on several stops along the ride in that province in terms of discrimination against religious minorities, and often really the main target are Muslim communities and Muslim women, specifically who wear the hijab. So we had the Charter of Quebec Values that was proposed, Bill 60, several years ago by the Parti Québécois. It did not go anywhere. Later, then we had from the Liberal government, the provincial Liberal government in Quebec, Bill 62, and that was going to prevent women who wear the face veil from accessing education or accessing healthcare. So remember that visual image of the different ways that discrimination can happen. So that was preventing women from being able to access healthcare, education, things that they as taxpayers actually pay into, and yet they would be those rights be taken away from them. And that did not go through, or is no longer on the books. But now what we have on the books and what's being challenged is Bill 21. And so many of you would be familiar with Bill 21. It was passed on June 17th, 2019. Basically, it was brought forward by the current government, the provincial government, the Coalition Avenir Québec. And basically what it does, it bans public sector employees such as teachers, police officers, judges, and others from wearing or displaying religious symbols such as hijabs, niqabs, turbans, and more. It also impacts, of course, on different religious communities, the Jewish community, the Sikh community, and Christian communities who want to wear visible symbols. But many people do believe that the disproportionate impact is on Muslim women with hijab. Okay. Sorry, if you have your microphone on, please do mute yourself. Okay, so we're going to take a moment here now for any questions before I get into part 2 of the presentation on gendered Islamophobia. I know we're cramming lots of information for you all, and I'm really glad that we're able to. But if there's any questions for Dos, maybe if you can let me know if there's anything in the questions that we can just pause for a moment and take any.
So Mira had one or two. So one was, if we can cite references to the data that is being presented. So I didn't know what you wanted to answer for that.
Well, any questions that you have about it, just put in the questions and we can respond to you specifically about what you're asking, like what data you're referring to.
Okay. And the second question I had, it was actually about getting the presentation. So we will talk about it towards the end of the workshop, about the focus groups and when we will be sending the presentation. But besides that, I don't have anything else.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll jump in. We will be taking a break. So I know that we're getting through a lot of details right now, but we are going to take a break for sure. So let's just get through the next section here. Sharing the screen. Okay, so gendered Islamophobia. So what is gendered Islamophobia? We're going to watch a short, again, a video, and Jasmine, I'll get you to set it up so that we can go through an explanation of what we mean when we use this term.
Patriarchy is a global force, and there is no society with full gender equality. But the dominant representation of Muslim women is that they are especially oppressed by their religion and the men in their communities. This misrepresentation or stereotype is used to justify forms of violence that claim to save Muslim women but harm them instead. This contradiction is known as gendered Islamophobia. For example, the most frequent victims of Islamophobic hate crimes in Canada are Muslim women. This is compounded for Black Muslim women who also experience anti-Black racism. And yet the media focuses almost exclusively on the persecution of Muslim women by their own communities. So-called honor crimes, which are extremely rare in North America, are heavily reported on. Incidents in which Muslim women have been attacked or killed with racist intent, however, receive much less attention. Academic research shows how North American media perpetuates the stereotype of the oppressed Muslim woman, while downplaying Muslim women's agency as well as violence against non-Muslim women. For instance, the Globe and Mail devoted more coverage to the tragic Shafia murder case alone than to the widespread problem of fatal violence against Canadian women as a whole. These stereotypes also underlie laws like Canada's Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. This law adds extra punishments for certain so-called cultural practices stereotypically associated with Muslims, like so-called honor killings, forced marriage, and polygamy, even though these are already illegal in Canada. As legal experts note, this law actually makes women less safe. If they report their abuse, their family members might be criminalized or deported, and so they are more likely to stay silent. Niqab and hijab bans similarly claim to protect Muslim women, But such bans violate Muslim women's freedom to choose what they wear. They also lead to further stigmatization and marginalization of Muslim women by preventing their full economic and social participation. Our foreign policy is also shaped by gendered Islamophobia, like when politicians justified the war in Afghanistan as a mission to save Muslim women. Of course, women aren't actually liberated by the destruction of their societies. Resisting gendered Islamophobia means recognizing that Muslim women are not passive victims waiting to be saved, but that, like women everywhere, Muslim women also resist the violence and oppression they experience. It means recognizing that Islam is, for many women, a resource for liberation. Resisting gendered Islamophobia means always going back to a fundamental feminist principle. Listen to what Muslim women themselves are saying about the clothes they wear, about the violence they experience, and about the forms of solidarity they need.
Okay, so that really provides a very good overview of gendered Islamophobia. And then from there, so the same types of various ways that Islamophobia can be experienced will then be specifically targeting women in that context. So whether we're talking about microaggressions, whether we're talking about stereotyping, exclusion, verbal abuse and threats, online harassment, sexual assault, harassment, physical violence. So it's all similar that can happen on more general, but where it is targeting women specifically. And then just to, speak to the point about microaggressions, this is a term as well that is often bandied about, but not everyone is always very familiar with what this means. So microaggressions are the daily slights or indignities, put downs, and insults that can be verbal or nonverbal that portray hostility or bias toward a group of people. Microaggressions directed at Muslim women, girls, trans, and non-binary individuals are often rooted also in those harmful stereotypes about Muslims. So, an example of microaggressions, do you shower with that thing on? Aren't you hot? Does your dad make you wear that? Can you even hear me? These are just harmful, like they are actually racist, but they're described as microaggressions because they're a little bit more subtle than coming right out and saying you're oppressed or your religion is sexist or oppressive or what have you. Okay, so we're going to take a break right here. We'll take a break for 10 minutes, 6:39. Let's come together no later than 6:49, 6:50 on the dot if we want to give a few extra seconds there, and then we will resume. So hopefully you're doing well. And again, if you need any resources or support, if any of this is difficult to consume, please make sure to let us know and to find those resources for support. So see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, all right, so next what we're going to do, and I suggested this earlier, we talked a little bit about intersectionality and intersectional identities. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means. So again, all of you who are here, I'm assuming either just want to have this information for your own self or in order to do your own training or own information. It's very important to be able to speak to various aspects of Islamophobia. And one of these areas is looking at intersectionality of different identities. So what does that even mean? So intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. And this is from the woman who termed this intersectionality, termed the phrase, or coined the term, Kimberly Crenshaw. So when we're looking at Islamophobia, it isn't one size fits all. It often intersects with other forms of discrimination, such as anti-Black racism, sexism, homophobia, and ableism. The lived experiences of Muslims with intersectional identities are often removed from conversations surrounding the Muslim experience. So oftentimes when you hear about Islamophobia, all of these other types of identities that people may be impacted by are often rendered invisible. And this is very, very disturbing to people who want to speak about the various oppressions that they are facing. So for instance, when we talk about being Black and Muslim, a lot of people don't realize that the first Muslims that arrived in North America were Black Muslims. Islamic history has its roots in Africa, but due to the lack of focus on these historical facts, Black Muslims feel that their identities continue to be erased due to a lack of knowledge and inclusion within conversations surrounding Blackness and Muslimness. In fact, in 2018-2019, Dr. Fatima Jackson Best, a public health researcher, did work with the Tesla Institute in partnership with the Black Muslim Initiative to compile the report titled Black Muslims in Canada, a systemic review of published and unpublished literature. And so this research was very important because it sort of demonstrated where sort of that blindness was happening, or the invisibility of the Black Muslim experience was occurring. So what she found in her research, some of the key sort of findings are on your screen. 34 reports, papers, and journal articles had been written about Black Muslim experiences in Canada. 94% of that research was focused on first and second generation Somalis in Canada. Most of the research on Somali communities were actually done by Somali people, and the research mainly covered integration, resettlement, and immigration. Anti-Black Islamophobia, what does that mean? Is discrimination against Black, is discrimination of Black Muslim experience from non-Black Muslims for being Black and from non-Muslims for being Black and Muslim. So that means that within our own Muslim communities, there can be anti-Black racism against Black Muslims, or outside of the Muslim community, Black Muslims can experience that racism based on their race, as well, again, as a religion. Within the Muslim population, 9% is identified as Black Muslim. And from there, enslaved West African Black Muslims were most likely the first Muslims in Canada. Most of the qualitative methods like focus groups, life histories, and one-on-one interviews were used in a lot of the research that's been done on these communities. 6% of research about non-Somali Black Muslims are from the US, Caribbean, Central and South American, African countries. And so to conclude, more research is clearly needed on Black Muslims who are Shia, Ahmadiyya, and Asmali, who identify with the Nation of Islam, Moorish Science Temple, 5% Nation, and Nubian Nation, and the context, realities, and experiences of non-Somali Black Muslims as well. And then when you look at cases, for instance, the case of the killing of Abdirahman Abdi, this case, which occurred here in Ottawa, where I am, on January 24th, 2017, is when Abdirahman Abdi, a Somali Canadian with mental health issues, was murdered during an interaction with the Ottawa Police Service. Now, it should be noted that the police officer that was involved in that case was charged with, I believe it was second-degree murder. He was acquitted. However, communities still believe and maintain that Abdirahman Abdi was murdered. Mr. Abdi did not have any past criminal background. There were no indications that he posed a threat to the lives or safety of the police officers. Another sort of area in which I've alluded to is the idea of being Black and Muslim. The Blackness is, again, often made invisible, and so that there's been various efforts to really make that more prominent and be able to have discourse and dialogue about this within our communities. For instance, this is an example of a photo from the Being Black and Muslim photo series by photographer Bobby Rogers. So just an example, a sample of some of that work, where being Black and Muslim means constantly being asked to choose between your race and your religion, because society has tried to convince you that only one can exist. So how do we, as we try to, for those of us who are not from the Black Muslim communities, how can we try to sort of assist and create space for these identities? Well, we can amplify Black Muslim-led organizations. There are many of them. Some of them include the Black Muslim Initiative, Muslim Arc, Anti-Racism Collective, the Justice for Abdurrahman Abdi Coalition, for instance. Islamophobia and Muslim with disabilities. So Muslims with disabilities often face the dual challenges of being discriminated against for both Islamophobia and ableism. The combination, again, of these two identities greatly impacts their everyday experiences. And also, given that most Muslims are racialized, there are other identities that exacerbate the experience of Muslim with disabilities. So there you could have, again, up to 2, 3, 4 different identities that people are holding, and that they're experiencing oppressions based on them. We had the tragic killing of Ijaz Chowdhury last June. Ijaz Chowdhury was a 62-year-old man suffering from schizophrenia. He was shot and killed by the Peel police following his family's call to a non-emergency line for a wellness check. So again, you have the intersection of a disability, the mental health issue, as well as being a Muslim, being a South Asian man, etc. This quote from a young woman named Maria, and I actually believe she might be on the call today with us. She says that intersectionality is one of the most underrated and overlooked topics in today's discourse. Our intersections can affect us in more ways than one. As a Muslim with a disability growing up, I was oppressed and faced systemic barriers in all walks of life, just because of my physical ability and religious beliefs. And again, some of these oppressions can occur even within our own communities. So for instance, I know here in Ottawa, one of our oldest mosques for the longest time did not have wheelchair access to the women's section. And I know this because my mother was in a wheelchair for many years. And it was later in her life that there was an elevator set up in the mosque where she could finally attend prayer. So organizations that we can help amplify and support, Smile Canada, Dean Support Services, Deaf Muslims of Canada are just a few. Islamophobia and LGBTQI plus Muslims. Islamophobia also impacts these communities, LGBTQ2S+. Oftentimes people think that queer and trans Muslims don't exist and that all Muslims are homophobic or transphobic, and this is not true. In addition, queer Muslims face both Islamophobia and homophobia at the same time. This quote from Sumaya Yahya Khamisa, she says, the LGBTQ plus community is mainly populated by white people who often hold Islamophobic belief systems and congregate at bars and clubs, both of which I do not partake in. This leaves LGBTQ plus Muslims such as myself in a middle ground, banished from both communities and filled with feelings of isolation. And so some of the organizations as well that are addressing these issues include Salam and the Queer Muslim Project. Intersectional identities of Indigenous communities. So Canada operates, Indigenous Muslims. Canada operates on unceded Indigenous land and is a settler colonial state, as we all know. Indigenous peoples continue to experience systemic anti-Indigenous racism at the hands of systems and institutions in power and from ordinary citizens. Being an Indigenous a Muslim means experiencing both the anti-Indigenous racism and Islamophobia simultaneously. Indigenous Muslims face the repercussions of both. And this quote from an anonymous source, being an Indigenous woman in Canada for me has been a mixed experience, she says, from feeling the camaraderie and sisterhood of my Indigenous sisters, whom I always felt had my back, to feeling shunned, looked down upon, or as a curiosity among non-Indigenous people. Occasionally, the reverse has been true. Being a visible Muslim wearing hijab and my powers of dejection have multiplied. Now, I'm an outsider everywhere I go, until I prove otherwise or someone who knows me vouches for me. So a very isolating experience. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to reinforce, institutions don't often recognize intersectionality and addressing discrimination and various forms of Islamophobia. This is very prominent in hate crimes reporting, as I'm going to talk to you later today in the presentation. But essentially, if you are a victim of a hate crime in this country, and say you feel that you were targeted because you're Black and Muslim, for instance, you can only choose one. Because literally the program that the police have on their computers and that they put in this data only allows one to be check marked, which means that the data really is quite flawed. And this is something that we are lobbying to change, but it definitely demonstrates how that intersectionality has really not been brought forward in many of the ways that institutions are trying to determine what the problems are. Okay, so let's take a bit of a check-in now and a 10-minute breakout session again. You may find that you're in new groups. I'm not sure, I'll let Jasmine explain it because I think that our group keeps growing actually today. I think we're over 100 participants. So Jasmine, I'm gonna pass it over to you. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through some of the learning just to kind of reinforce if you yourself have experienced Islamophobia based on various intersectional oppressions, and you're comfortable to share that, or if you have questions and you just want to hear from other participants in your breakout room, this is the opportunity to have that conversation. And I do believe we'll have an opportunity as well to use the JAM boards again. And hopefully we've addressed some of the concerns out of the first one, where now you should not have any issues to get in there and put some of your thoughts that you have to date from our presentation. So Jasmine, over to you.
Perfect, thank you, Amira. So there'll be 4 groups of 25 people into each breakout room. And there'll be no Jamboard for this breakout room. We'll just be a discussion about the learned topics so far. So I'll open up the breakout rooms now.
All right, I'm going to share my screen again. I think that was a very, very interesting breakout session, at least in ours. I hope that others people as well had a chance to really share. I actually wind up enjoying our breakout sessions more than anything else in this workshop, just because it's such a great opportunity to hear from each other and to share ideas. Okay, so moving along, we're going to now look at confronting Islamophobia. And so one of the ways that we can do that is by trying to sort of interrupt Islamophobia where it happens. Now, one thing that's really interesting to note is that there is something called the bystander effect. So when it's, for instance, the bystander effect basically refers to the phenomenon in which the greater the number of people present, the less likely people are to help a person in distress. So when an emergency situation occurs, when, for instance, someone is in trouble or is facing, in our context, an Islamophobic incident or attack, observers are more likely to take action if there are few or no other
Amira's computer is frozen.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
I'm back? Okay. Yeah, it says my internet connection is stable. Okay. Should I start again from the start of the bystander effect, or?
You can start with when an emergency situation occurs.
Right. So when an emergency situation occurs, observers are more likely to take action if there are few or no other witnesses. So being part of a large crowd makes it so no single person has to take responsibility for an action or inaction. And so what we've heard, and actually there's been a few incidents that we've heard of in the past where there are people who are witnessing an act of Islamophobia and aren't necessarily intervening. And people are like, why did nobody intervene in that situation? And so this is often the reason that people don't feel that they have to, or that there's enough people that someone else should do it. Now, what we certainly don't want to ever be in that situation, if we see, or if we're training others, or we're telling and providing education to others about the phenomenon of any type, obviously, of discrimination or abuse or harassment that's happening in front of us, whether it's based on Islamophobia or any other form of discrimination, what we want to do is we want to give people options. So what are your options if you're in that situation? And so this brings us to the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. These interventions are actually developed through the Violence Against Women work that's done to address and disrupt harassment of women, but it certainly works in any type of other harassment. So the 5 Ds: direct, distract, delegate, delay, and document. So we're gonna go through each of those right now. So the first is direct. It's the action of directly confronting the attacker. You should only do this if you're comfortable and if you're not at risk. So for example, you see someone attacking someone else, you tell them, stop that right now, okay? Distract. This strategy involves an individual attempting to distract the perpetrator. So for example, you see someone, they're bullying, or they're speaking rudely to someone, or there's something going on negative. You may say, excuse me, can I get some information about where the nearest bus station is, or engaging in a random conversation with them, or pretending that you know the person that's being attacked, and you say, oh, hey, Julie, I wanted to talk to you about something, or hey, Khadija, I want to ask you this question. I've been looking for you everywhere, or whatever it is, if you're on campus or what have you, wherever the site may be, and you just try to distract the person. Delegate is the tactic of getting another person to become involved in the situation to support the victim. So basically, you're trying to get more people involved so that you're not confronting the attacker by yourself. So for example, if you're on the bus, you might ask the bus driver, or if you've got a friend nearby, say, come, let's go deal with the situation. Let's go try to distract together, or let's go try to help that victim together, so that you're not on your own. Delay. This is when you don't feel safe, or you're not able to get involved right away, but you want to stick around, you're staying nearby, and you're going to check in with the victim once that incident is over. It's important to make sure that they're okay and that you can provide them with support resources. So for example, you go up to them, do you need help now? Can I walk with you somewhere that's safe for you? Can I help you get to your next destination? So you haven't completely given up, but you just weren't able to get involved initially. And then of course, document. This should happen no matter what. This really is about recording the situation in a written or digital form so that you're able to refer back to it. So you can include the specifics of the incident, including the date, the time, and other descriptions. You can use audio recording, capturing the incident on video, writing it in a journal. We know just from the tragic murder of George Floyd, how valuable a video of that murder was. In fact, the young woman who took that video got a Pulitzer Prize, for being brave enough to stand there and take that and document that video of what was happening to the late George Floyd. So that documentation is so important because it can be used later in order to seek justice for the victim. Okay, so any questions on that? Maybe I'll ask Firdaus if you have any questions about anything like that. If anyone has any questions, put them in your chat right now before we get into unpacking hate and hate groups.
Nothing so far, Amira. It's just that people are wanting to deliver these trainings to their organizations, which is a great sign.
That's great.
Providing them with the support, but otherwise,
that's perfect. That's perfect. That's exactly what this is for. So training you all to be trainers in your own spaces. That's music to our ears. Okay, so unpacking hate now. So we have to recognize now, we've been talking about bias, we're talking about discrimination and oppression, and there are actual hate groups in this country. So what does that mean? A hate group is a group which, as demonstrated by statements, by their leaders or their activities, they are overtly hateful towards or create an environment of overt hatred towards an identifiable group as defined in the Criminal Code, the Canadian Human Rights Act, or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So what is an identifiable group? Any section of the public distinguished by color, race, religion, national or ethnic origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or mental or physical disability. The prohibited grounds of discrimination are on all of those that I just listed, according to the Canadian Human Rights Act. And then again, within our charter, the Constitution Act, every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so these are really important for us to know. So how many hate groups are there in Canada? Well, in 2015, Dr. Barbara Perry, who's been delivering the sister sort of workshop to this one on cyber hate, she's one of the leading experts on hate groups in this country. She and Dr. Ryan Scrivens identified more than 100 active right-wing extremist groups operating in the country. And 2 years later, by 2017, she said that they had seen at least a 25% growth in the number of active groups, and now they estimate over 300. Now, the number of these groups is very imperfect measure because of the scale of the organized or loosely organized groups of hate in Canada. But it is a metric that people refer to because it's harder to count the number of hate supporters and sympathizers within these far-right movements. So in other words, it's really hard to determine like how many people belong to such groups in this country. All we know is that these groups are growing and there's more, essentially there's more and more of them that are active. Some of these main movements today, while there are the general racist right, these are born out of the anti-Muslim movement. So you would have heard some of these names, Northern Guard, Pegida. There's the religious anti-LGBTQ+ movement. So these are known as the Life Site News, Street Church. There are groups called the Accelerationists. They are would-be mass murderers and usually neo-Nazis. The Iron March legacy groups like the AWD and the Base. And then there are the young neo-Nazis, the alt-right groypers in America First, and then the incels. So for instance, we saw the Toronto van attack, for instance, that was committed by an individual who is part of the incel movement. So they are misogynistic, anti-women. And so online networks, when we look at, for instance, the Quebec City Mosque Massacre, the Toronto van attack, the activity of a group called the Base, which had a soldier within the Canadian Army who was part of the Base and who had been plotting an attack in the US, the killing at the International Muslim Organization in Toronto of the individual that I mentioned earlier, Mohammed Zafis Aslam, who was killed by a member of the neo-Nazi supporter. All of those incidents that I've just listed, they're all hate motivated. but only one of these groups, one of these incidents is actually tied to an actual group. The others are fueled by loose online networks. The only actual group of all of these related to all of these incidents is the base. The base is an actual far-right group. And so to be part of modern day hate right now, you don't need to be quote unquote a card carrying member of anything. Basically, and we don't know, for instance, what happened in London, Ontario. We don't know what the evidence is that the police have gathered about the accused in that attack. All we know that he was motivated by hate. We've been told that he targeted this family because they're Muslim, but we don't know, like, was he part of a group? Was he, he's now been charged with terrorism. And so what is the evidence for that? We, again, don't know. So just to keep this in mind. An example of how loose these networks are and these groups are is, for instance, Yellow Vests Canada. So in France, where it originated, this was a popular anti-government movement with many calls to action. Here in Canada, the leaders of Canada's far-right and anti-Muslim movement stole the name and the vests that people wear. And what they did was they built a 250,000 group, member strong Facebook page. So who's in that, who's part of that group on Facebook? 250,000 people, 250,000 people. Well, they're run-of-the-mill conservatives and people who sympathize with the idea of Western separation from the rest of Canada. They got swept up into it. They're lured by a variety of issues. For some, it was about oil and gas. Others, it was about, being anti-liberal. But within Yellow Vests Canada, it was full of blatant anti-Muslim racism and calls to assassinate politicians. These were the prevailing kinds of posts, and the audience, stuck around. They didn't leave. They didn't find that kind of content problematic. And those who did and tried to say something about that were often shouted down by the group and removed. And the rhetoric kept escalating. The number of willing bystanders was and is deeply disturbing. And so then to respond or to monitor, an anti-racist collective called Yellow Vests Canada Exposed documented hundreds of examples of egregious content. And even though we know that only a minority of that 250,000 members would go on to be active in the hate scene, but you have to realize that even a small subset of 250,000 people is still a lot of people. So again, just to say, it's often anti-fascist groups and anti-hate groups that are actually doing a lot of this research. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network, for instance, is one organization that does a lot of this work, because police and security agencies have really not been looking at these movements at all in any real depth, only until very recently. In fact, it was after the Quebec City massacre that CSIS reopened its desk looking at white supremacist movements in this country, after having determined that there was no more threat. So just to give you that idea. Now, the same exact thing is happening today with the COVID conspiracy scene. These movements tolerate or promote hate, and in the case of QAnon, spread conspiracies built on classic anti-Semitic tropes that lay the groundwork for neo-Nazis and other hate preachers to try to recruit them. So groups emerge out of these movements, and individuals carry out hateful or dangerous behavior because they've been radicalized by movements and ideologies. So for all of us, when we're talking about these examples, we need to be aware of movements, of groups, and significant individuals. And what we know that these movements, have fueled, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, anti-Asian racism, which has become such a problem, huge scourge in our country right now, that Vancouver was deemed to be the anti-Asian hate crime capital of North America. So just to tell you the severity of the hate. And what we know too then is that the promotion of Islamophobia is also happening by key figures in these movements. And so again, if you want to do more research or learn more, the Canadian Islamophobia Industry Research Project that I mentioned earlier, they've actually developed fact sheets on Islamophobia in Canada in partnership with the Bridge Initiative of Georgetown University. And you can actually go through that list and you'll find, along with general fact sheets, but you'll find specific information about various individuals you can see them listed there, who are actually fueling and pushing out very dangerous hate to audiences online. So that's also very important to be aware of. Now, we can't talk about Islamophobia in Canada without addressing the politicization of Islamophobia that up until recently was a real driver of a lot of the hate that we were seeing. So many of you will recall after the Quebec City massacre, there was a motion that was being debated, motion 103, M103. And this motion was a very basic sort of motion to say that, in Canada, we needed to study Islamophobia and other forms of religious discrimination. And yet it was politicized by the Conservative Party. And at the time there was a Conservative leadership race. So people like Kelly Leach were using this, as you see the image on your screen, sending out content, completely using those myths and stereotypes about Islam as being oppressive, about silencing freedom of speech, to say that this was what M103 was all about. And as you saw, that type of politicization actually led to anti-Muslim rallies that happened right across Canada in the most traumatic way, because this was just after the massacre. So you have people who are gathering and in these, very, very, I would say not always violent, but they would be spreading very hateful ideology and information about Muslims. And even while there would be counter protests of people who would stand up to those types of narratives, nevertheless, they really do speak to the direct link between politicizing issues like Islamophobia and how that can lead to real world impact on our neighborhoods and in our communities. And so what we saw was, a real rise in hate in 2017, which is one of the worst years, although the argument could be made that many of our communities were very aware of hate, and so we're probably more likely to report if they've been the victim. But nevertheless, we have seen a continuous rise in hate crimes. And so just here, if you look at Statistics Canada, this is from Statistics Canada, which looks at the overall increase year to year. And as you see, 2017, was a significantly high year. But these numbers, let me be very clear, only demonstrate a tip of the iceberg. Up to 2/3 of hate crimes are not reported in Canada. And that is according to Statistics Canada, which every 5 years asks Canadians about, levels of their victimization, of whether, they believe they've been a victim in a hate crime or any other type of crime. And in the last time the survey was done 5 years ago, over 330,000 people in Canada said that they were a victim of a hate crime. So compared to, looking at any of these numbers, we're looking at under, anywhere under, 2,500 is like, or 2,100 is like the highest number. We are not capturing what is actually happening for a variety of reasons. And often it is because people are reluctant to report to police. And if they do report to police, they're often not believed, or it's not being documented because they're being told, nothing can happen. We can't do anything about it. So nevertheless, we're still seeing a rise. And so again, just to kind of get a sense of, again, that tip of the iceberg, but in 2019, 46%, nearly half of the hate crimes are motivated by race or ethnicity. So here where you see it's race, you see that the Black community reported the highest number of hate crimes within that context. And then within hate crimes motivated by religion, you see the Jewish community had the highest rate, and then Muslims following that. This can give you a sense of what's happening in your own province. So you can take a moment to take a look. In 2019, almost all the provinces and territories reported increases. So we can take a look. We also saw an increase in hate crimes motivated by sexual orientation in 2019. And the majority of police reported hate crimes were non-violent offenses, as you see. And so take a moment just to look through. Okay. Oh, okay. Someone's not. Someone's not muting their microphone. Okay, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat and we'll take a moment shortly to answer them. So a lot of the concern around hate in Canada is also fueled by online hate. So a report issued by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in the UK identified, and get this, more than 6,600 online pages, accounts, or groups in Canada that were spreading white supremacist or misogynistic views. On a per capita basis, Canada was shown to be one of the most active countries in the world when it came to spreading toxic views. So this really puts to rest the idea of the polite Canadian. Like this country has some of the most active racists spreading toxic views online, racist, sexist, the whole gamut. And this is, of course, deeply, deeply troubling. And a lot of it is anti-Muslim. And so many of you have probably seen these types of content, Islamophobia is not true, it's a lie, efforts to try to talk about other, discrimination against other communities to try to, disappear this content. And then you actually have groups specifically starting in order to address, quote unquote, the spread of political Islam. So this article from the New York Times, for instance, shows, this individual here who founded a group called La Meute, which is, a group specifically to stop the spread of, as I said, invasive political Islam, even though this guy lives in like some regional part of Quebec, which probably has almost no Muslims living there. And yet somehow he's got this idea that he's got to create a group. And so this is La Meute. This is the Facebook, the public Facebook page. It has over 16,000 members. They have both the offline presence in rallies. They're often anti-immigrant rallies, anti-refugee rallies, anti-Muslim rallies, as well as that online presence. And so if you take a look, I was just looking through, these are screenshots that I just kind of looked through some of their content. If you notice, for instance, they took offense, the owner of the group took offense to the fact that Alberta had an image of International Women's Day and a woman wearing a headscarf, part of that image. And so he's saying, oh, look at this comment from Alberta, how they celebrate, International Women's Day. Now he has turned off commenting for this post because the comments are often so hateful that they would get shut down because of all the pressure that's been put on social media platforms. Still not enough, but you see how lots of reactions, lots of shares. So it creates a very negative environment for Muslims. And so getting back to if you saw something that was negative online, if you even tried to report that to the police, we found that just like hate crimes in the community, hate crimes online or hate or threats or issues where people are very concerned about their safety, for instance, online, people were not able to report it to police or police were not taking it seriously. Again, Dr. Barbara Perry did a very extensive report on policing hate in Ontario. And in that, she found some of the key points that people were reluctant to talk about or address hate crimes was that they didn't know what laws protected them from hate. So, what are the hate crime laws? A lot of people don't even know. They didn't know how these crimes could be prosecuted, and that there was a community trust deficit. So when you're doing these workshops in your own communities, you're probably going to find out that a lot of our community members don't really understand what the rules are around hate crimes or how to report or what, if anything, can be done about a perpetrator who is spreading either online or making threats in real life, or what to do about it. And so these are some of the problems and issues that do have some solutions, but that do take a lot of work within our communities. And so from the report, it said, it seems like there is this lack of coordination between law enforcement, the Crown attorneys who bring forward the charges, and the Attorney General in every province who actually has to make a decision as to whether a hate crime will be prosecuted, including online hate. So it would need a whole workshop in and of itself to talk about some of these complications, but enough to say that there's a lot of confusion around how we hold perpetrators of hate accountable, whether they are offline or online. And sometimes what we've had and what we've seen is that, using the courts is so difficult that you have to actually take them to court, not criminally, not through criminal prosecution, but through, for example, defamation, as happened, for instance, with a Muslim restaurant owner who was being sued online by an individual that was being, people were trying to bring him to be prosecuted with the police. The police were not taking any action. So Mohammed Faqih decided to sue him for defamation and actually won $2.5 million. Now, the guy doesn't have probably $10 to his name, but it was a very symbolic win because it demonstrated that such defamation has a real dangerous impact, not only on the family and the individual and his family, but also on the broader community when people are being defamed. And the Islamophobia against this individual was so egregious. And what is very important to understand too is that hate crimes are message crimes, according to the American Psychological Association, which described them as message crimes in that the perpetrator is sending a message to the members of a certain group that they are despised, devalued, or unwelcome in a particular neighborhood, community, school, or workplace. And so I know one of our participants was asking a lot about our sources. So for example, in a report by the Department of Justice Canada in 2008, there was actually a case study provided in which they looked at a violent beating of a Sudanese refugee in Victoria in 2006 in Kitchener. And it showed how that beating of that individual so much negatively reverberated throughout the Sudanese communities in a ways that made them change their behavior, but not amongst the broader public in the same neighborhood. So really, when a specific community is targeted, it really is the members of that specific community that will feel that negative effect, that will change their behavior. They'll be more frightened. They'll be less likely, for instance, to walk out at night, or less likely to be by themselves, for instance, in a public park or what have you, because of the fear that these types of hate crimes that reverberate in these communities. Okay, we're going to have one video next, Jasmine, that looks at hate crimes and gives us, again, a little bit more of the context of the impact on our communities.
On January 29, 2017, Alexandre Bissonnette entered the Islamic Cultural Center in Quebec City while Muslims were gathered in prayer. He shot and killed 6 people and injured 19 others. At the time, the shooting was the most fatal act of political violence in Canada since 1989, and it was widely recognized across the country as a heinous act of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is defined as the unfounded fear and/or hatred of Islam or Muslims, leading to violence and systemic discrimination. But massacres in mosques are just the tip of the Islamophobia iceberg. After the shooting, negative attitudes and suspicion toward Muslims remained high. Anti-Muslim hate crimes actually shot up across Canada. The mosque was voted down in a town referendum in its bid to build a cemetery to bury their dead. All of this, and yet most Canadians still dismissed Islamophobia as a serious problem. Islamophobia also includes skewed media representation. The CBC spent only 5 minutes covering the mosque shooting the night it happened. And the day after, the Globe and Mail dedicated a mere side column on the front page. And generally, studies show that violence committed by Muslims is covered much more than violence against Muslims. This helps perpetuate state practices that both over-police Muslims and under-protect them. Less than a year after the mosque shooting, Public Safety Canada said that violent Islamist ideology is still the greatest threat to Canada, reinforcing perceptions of Muslims as terrorists. But far-right extremists and white supremacists are responsible for many times more acts of violence. And yet the label of terrorists is reserved almost exclusively for Muslims, not just in the media, but the legal system as well. While the Quebec mosque shooter wasn't even charged with terrorism, Muslims have been convicted of terrorism without actually injuring a single person. Incidents like the Quebec mosque shooting are enabled by a whole deeper iceberg of policies and practices. To really understand and address Islamophobia, we have to look beyond incidents of mass violence to what lies underneath the surface.
Okay, so thank you for that. I am seeing a lot of questions actually starting to come in. So what I will do before I get into looking at some of the laws, I'll answer a few. So let me just stop sharing for a moment, and I'm just going to pull some of the questions that I've been seeing. I won't be able to get through all of them because we do still have a bit to go through, but just because I do want to just take a moment. So a few quick questions. So one, I'm seeing a question about thoughts around the decrease in Alberta of the Stats Can report, the 2019 hate crimes. So again, just to reiterate, a lot of hate crimes are not reported. So either people are not going to the police to report, and we will talk about that shortly, a little bit why, or the police will say, okay, someone yelled at you while you were, going, and they've made a threat against you. It's unlikely we're going to be able to do anything about them or catch them. We're just going to leave this alone. And I'll give you one quick example from here in Ottawa that happened like that, where a woman was literally hearing her neighbor who was actually intoxicated, but yelling horrible things about Muslims and that they should all be killed or what have you. And it was during an attack that was happening in London at the time by Muslims. And so he was reacting, but saying very dangerous things about Muslims. She called the police. They came. By the time they came, the neighbor was inside. They told her, there's nothing we can do about it. And they left. And it wasn't until she reached out to NCCM and we wrote a letter to the deputy chief that they actually did find that he could have been actually charged with uttering threats. And because she didn't want to press charges, she didn't do that, but she did ask the police to talk to him and to tell him that that was not okay and to give him warning. But it took the intervention of an organization for them to act. And sadly, we do hear generally that there is almost a reluctance to take these cases seriously. So there will be more that I can say about later. And then the other thing is someone is asking, why don't we see governments doing more early intervention in locating these hate groups and dismantling them and not waiting for a tragedy to take place and then giving attention to this? It's a great question. And in fact, there are many organizations, specifically NCCM, who has been lobbying the federal government to put more of these hate groups on their terrorist entity list, as they recently did with the Proud Boys, as many of you may know, and deeming them as terrorist organizations. And so by doing that, that means that they are unable to raise money and they're not unable to organize, and then they become disbanded and they cannot have the same impact that they would otherwise. So there, again, there is a slow movement towards that. But as you've seen through the videos, and sort of the main theme of today is that unfortunately it has been Muslims who have been disproportionately over surveilled as sources of terrorism, versus looking at more broadly, these groups, these hate groups that are becoming more and more organized and more numerous in Canada. So I'll pause there on those questions, and we'll resume into the presentation. So give me one moment and pull it up again. here we are. So looking at the laws, and someone was asking specifically about hate crime laws, and there are several criminal code laws that look at hate crimes specifically. And then in terms of online hate, we have been waiting for new law around online hate legislation. And we've been promised that the federal government was going to bring that in as well. They have not yet brought in online hate legislation, but what they have said that they will do is that they are going to eventually bring in this kind of legislation. And what it's going to do is that it would have new rules around hate speech and a new regulator to oversee a framework to include fines against social media platforms that allow hate to stay up on their pages without taking any measures against them, against users, for instance, who are posting, violent messages about Muslims, for instance, and that they would create new categories around what is illegal content, and amongst what is considered illegal, hate speech, terrorist content, and other forms of content that they would be deeming. What did actually happen just on the last day of the parliamentary session, was it last month? Ottawa outlined new legislation to define and crack down. They said that they will do it, but what they actually did was they said that there will be a new civil remedy. And so I don't want people to get bogged down because this is kind of a little bit complicated, but essentially what they're saying is that what they hope to do is if you have been targeted in any type of sort of hateful way, that you could not only go to the police, for instance, but you would have a civil remedy. You'd be able to go to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and make a complaint against that user, and that user who did that about you or said anything about you or about our communities, they could get fined and that they could get some kind of punishment and consequence for that. So that's all sort of in the works, but nothing has been finalized, nothing is set in stone, but certainly the awareness about these issues has grown, and we keep hearing from a commitment from the federal government that they will take action on that. And one thing that is very helpful that I've been sharing with people is that a lot of times people say, how do you know something is hateful? And so what the federal government has committed to, and what is in our own case law, is using what is known as the 11 hallmarks of hate as the basis of how we outline what is actually considered to be hateful. And so I'm going to go through these very quickly because they're very useful. If you are online or you hear someone say something to you and you want to figure, is this hate or am I just being sensitive? Here's how Supreme Court has reaffirmed the hallmarks of hate. So if any allegations towards a target group that could include the following elements or themes is considered hate. So the targeted group is presented as a powerful menace to society. Perpetrators use news reports and purportedly reputable sources to further negative stereotypes. The targeted group is portrayed as preying upon children, the aged, the vulnerable. The targeted group is portrayed as responsible for the world's problems. The targeted group is portrayed as dangerous or violent by nature. The targeted group is portrayed as devoid of redeeming qualities and innate evil. Perpetrators communicate the idea that banishment, segregation, or eradication of the group is required. The group is dehumanized through association with or comparison to animal or vermin. Perpetrators use highly inflammatory language and rhetoric to create a tone of extreme hatred or contempt. Perpetrators trivialize and or celebrate past persecutions or tragedies involving the target group. We actually saw that with the London killing, where you had an individual who posted a video where many of you may have seen it, where there was women in hijab walking on the street, and the perpetrator said, "Oh, when a van drove by, oh, he should hit them too." Call for violent action against the target group. So there is an overwhelming support for regulation on online hate. This is really helpful for us to know because it will, especially there's going to be a federal election in the next few weeks called. So all of us who are voters and are going to participate, and hopefully if you are, again, in your communities doing presentations, encouraging people to vote, we should be pushing candidates to commit to regulation around online hate, because we know that various studies have shown that the people who are most impacted and witness online hate are Black, Indigenous, Muslim, and Jewish communities. And so whatever the federal government will do really does have a real world impact on people's lives. So we're going to do, I think this is our last check-in and breakout, just to see how people are doing, how people are feeling about the content, and just to have a conversation around online hate specifically. Is this something that you yourself are concerned with? Is it something that you've seen as it being a problem? Are you concerned that not enough people report seeing this kind of content? And are you also worried just generally about hate crimes? Is this an area that you feel in your own communities there's not enough being done about it? There's no relationship, for example, with local police on this topic. Is this an area that you would want to do work on, for instance? So we'll have some time. I think we're going to do, are we for time? I think we can do 10 minutes, Jasmine, in our breakout sessions here.
Hi there, were you able to join a breakout room? Hi, Gord, are you having some trouble?
I was put into a room in group 3, and as soon as I went in, it said you're now being returned.
Oh, that's strange. Okay, I'll
I
try to
haven't
move you
touched
again.
anything.
No worries, I'll try to move you again.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
All right, so we're all back, and what's amazing is that the more we get into this presentation, more people want to talk and share, and so that's amazing. I'm seeing a lot of learning happening, and people's minds are like kind of crackling. I see, and a lot of people are like expressing, at least in the group that I'm in, sort of a real intention to work with local police, local school boards, elected officials, to advocate for some of these issues. So we're going to talk more about how we can do that in a moment. So let me get back to the presentation. And here we are. Okay, so that's exactly where we are right now. How do we actually advocate for change? So we've kind of been setting up the space here for everyone to kind of be aware of all the problems. And so I'm gonna talk about sort of 3 key areas where we can start advocating for change. So with law enforcement, so this has been a topic that we've been talking about. So the hate crimes in our community, what we can be pushing for is better reporting. So here in Ottawa, we successfully lobbied the Auto Police Service to allow people to report hate crimes online. So now if you are a victim of a hate crime online, in your community, you can go online to report that hate. We actually pushed for better resources for the hate crimes unit in the police service. So now we have a dedicated detective in the hate crime unit in Ottawa who is doing education with targeted communities about what hate crimes are, how to report, and how to stay safe. The other thing that we're pushing for that I mentioned in our breakout is third-party reporting. So for example, settlement agencies, different ethnic organizations or religious groups, they can be trained by police to take hate crime reports and funnel it back to the police. And the police have to report on what has been done, what outcomes have been taken in the information that's been shared. And last thing that we need to push for is that intersectional data capture. So if you are targeted for more than one reason, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Black person, whether you're disabled and Black, or all of these different intersections, that you can report that and it can be captured adequately. You don't have to just choose one. So the third-party reporting already, NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, you can report to them if you've been a victim of hate. They don't yet send it directly to the police, but they can help you report to police. This is the example of Auto Police Service, where you see now the lists of all the reports that are taken online of different crimes. Now we have hate motivated incidents can be taken online. In our workplaces are another huge source, as we saw earlier, of where people can be treated with discrimination, with hate. And so what we need to do in our workplaces is do the education, hold people accountable, ensure that there are clear guidelines and policies on racism, anti-harassment, anti-racism, and provide the opportunities to learn and educate others. So you yourselves in any of your own workplaces need to figure out if you're unionized. There can be ways through your union to do that education. If you're not unionized, through your human resources as well. There are support for workplace accommodations, as well as anti-racism. So these are some documents you can refer to. NCCM has an employer's guide to Islamic religious practices. The Canadian Labour Congress has an excellent resource called Islamophobia at Work. And the Canadian Council of Muslim Women also has a position statement on employment and religious accommodation. In education is another huge place that could be a whole workshop of how our young people in particular are being impacted by discriminatory treatment. So what do we do in that situation? We need to document what's happening. We need to ensure that there are clear policies and guidelines on anti-racism and hate, and we need to have follow-up and demand accountability. I am so disappointed when I see that many of the parent councils that come together to organize activities for our schools do not often include Muslim parents, are not involved or engaged, or in some of the diversity committees or different equity committees that exist in school boards. You often see our communities are not participating. Again, as I said in our breakout room, if you are not at the table, chances are you're on the menu. Or another saying is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So choose which saying you want, but the message is the same. We have to be active and we have to be engaged. And what's happening in our schools is there are the way that we're seeing bullying occur, the way that the responses to bullying happen is very problematic. Faithism basically means sort of, it's like racism, but it's against faith. So you see the prioritization of, you know, Christian celebrations or events as opposed to any other minority religions or faiths. Teacher and staff interaction can be very discriminatory, even against our own students and children. There's often a lack of accountability, and sometimes we have Islamophobic curriculum as well. I'm going to provide two very quick case studies just to give you a sense. And I often say, if we don't address Islamophobia in our schools more than any other place in our society, we're just, it's almost as though we're never going to get ahead. Because if Islamophobia is allowed to take root in our schools, not only does that mean that we've got generation upon generation learning these harmful attitudes, but we also have our children who are going to internalize that Islamophobia and be ashamed of being Muslims. And there have been studies that show, you know, that young Muslim kids as young as between, I think it was ages 5 and 8 years old, a majority are afraid even to say that they're Muslim because of the Islamophobia that they see around them. So this case study out of the York Region District School Board was a case where there was a principal who made anti-Muslim Facebook posts. So she came under investigation, and the accountability only came after student and parent engagement. The community mobilized, there was media engagement, and that there was political engagement. And the reason this is so important is that all of you right now are getting this training. This is sophisticated training to a certain degree, because a lot of people don't realize that behind the scenes, in order to get accountability, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so if you are a parent or if you are engaged in your school board, you need to understand that if there's a case of any type of discrimination, and we're talking about Islamophobia, but I can tell you at York and other school boards where we found Islamophobia, it often included and issues of anti-Black racism were there as well. But you kind of see discrimination against one group mean that there's going to be discrimination against another group as well. And creating the allyship between communities is also a very powerful way to get the engagement, the mobilization, and to get action taken. So in York, that's what happened. In fact, there was such political engagement that the Minister of Education at the time ordered a review. And the review found, and I quote from the report, "Rather than take an immediate and unequivocal stance against Islamophobia and intolerance as soon as the board had knowledge of those Facebook postings, the board appeared to have completely deferred to staff on this matter. Even when it was evident that the school board's response was less than clear and transparent, the board maintained its silence." So really speaking to systemic Islamophobia in this situation here. And another case study also at the Peel District School Board is where, again, there was anti-Black racism. And then as they were doing work to uncover the anti-Black racism and address it, there was the uncovering of Islamophobia happening in these schools as well. And what we saw, as just like York, was the minister ordering a review of the board. And in that report, this quote, "We heard concerns about Islamophobia and were provided with French curriculum materials that were clearly Islamophobic, conveyed blatant hostility to the Muslim community, and an ignorance of the basic tenets of Islam." So again, through that report. And so this, you know, when the education ministry reviews these concerns, they actually put a school board principal on leave for xenophobic and racist comments. And then students and parents had come forward. And it's really important to note that students and parents can come forward even if they want to be anonymous, and often they do because they're fearful of the reprisals that they may face. It's still powerful. It's still going to be useful to encourage people to come forward, even if they can't say their name publicly. And again, in this case, I want to reiterate, accountability only happens with student and parent engagement, community mobilization, getting people to talk about it and to organize, to talk to the media, and to have that political engagement. So this is really giving you a sense of like how important our engagement and activism is in our own communities. Okay, we're going to pause here. We're almost at the end of the presentation. I promise. You folks have been so patient. We're going to do a quick post-workshop survey before we go to the final section of the presentation on taking action. So thank you for your patience so far, and I'll let Jasmine take it from here, and then I'll come back right after that survey.
Great, thanks, Samira. So The post-workshop survey will be done on mentimeter.com, just like how the pre-workshop survey was. And if Zainab is on the call, let's get Zainab to share her screen. Great, so the code for the post-workshop survey is 6738 3708. Great. So after the workshop, do you feel better informed on the different forms of Islamophobia in Canada? So with this, the difference between this and the pre-workshop survey is that the results are hidden for this post-workshop survey.
I'm just going to add that, this survey is really important for our own team, but also to the funder, Department of Canadian Heritage, Government of Canada. So I appeal to you all. I know it's been a long evening. We're almost done, but really, really important that you complete the post-workshop survey just to let us know how we did, how our presenter did, and really did this workshop have, good knowledge and good learning for you, and how will you be taking that forward? So I, again, thank you for your time.
Are we supposed to go to the link right now and do it?
Yes, www.menti.com.
It's just that we won't be able to see the survey results now, but we would like if you can complete the survey. Once you go to the website, just enter the code that is given, 6738 3708.
I don't even know how to get out of Zoom to get onto the survey.
You actually don't need to get out of Zoom. You open up a new page in your browser, because you shouldn't get out of Zoom. You just, get out, open up a new page on the browser and then type in www.menti.com, and then you'll be able to do the survey.
Or just go to chat and click on the link.
Yeah.
Or use your cell phone.
Yes, you could do that too. I just have a question for Zainab and Jasmine. So right now you've got this page where it says, after today's workshop, do you better understand? I think there's another word, right, that says, do you better understand? Like there's a fill in the blank there.
It's actually, if you keep going, there's several questions.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Because right now, the way it looks like it's sort of an incomplete statement that you're supposed to fill in.
Okay, so we'll give you a few minutes to complete the survey. Once again, it's www.menti.com. And the post-workshop survey is on the screen, 6738 3708. And if you're done the survey, you can react with the thumbs up or a smiley face so we can get a number of how many people have completed the survey so far. Okay, great. It looks like a lot of folks have completed the survey, so I'll hand it over back to Amira to finish us off.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, we're almost there. We're at the end of the presentation now, and so just to kind of bring it to kind of a positive end, talking about taking action. So we have talked already about different ways of taking action, but here's some more examples. So we've talked about education, signing or coordinating petitions in your own communities around addressing issues of hate, running social media campaigns if you can, creating art to spread awareness, protesting, taking a stand when you witness it. These are all different ways. There's a Green Square campaign that many of you are aware of to commemorate what happened on January 29th. Now, of course, we were able to successfully lobby the federal government to designate January 29th as a National Day of Remembrance on the Quebec Mosque Massacre and Action on Islamophobia. So this is an annual commemoration that we can now take to do that education on Islamophobia in our own communities and workplaces and schools. Rings of Peace, this is an example that happened after the Quebec Mosque Massacre and people came together and held hands. Can't wait that we can do that again after the pandemic, but hopefully not for a massacre, but just to, just show solidarity, like have ways to come together as community members, build interfaith opportunities. I've talked about the National Day of Remembrance. Building relationships is a really important thing to keep doing. I know many of you are already involved in your own communities through things like Muslim Awareness Weeks and what have you. These are, again, really proactive ways. We shouldn't wait until there's a massacre to engage. We should be constantly looking for ways to build coalitions to combat hate. This is an example from here in Ottawa, United for All, which is a coalition that brings together community health centers and different organizations regularly to talk about how do we build more community, sort of more inclusive communities. There are different campaigns that are always organized, things like blockhate.ca, which is being done by the YWCA right now. We can participate in it, we can share it on our Facebook or our social media. We can learn about organizations like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network that gives lots of examples of how to monitor hate groups, how to engage. We can do our own calls to action, create community pledges, thinking about ways that we can make our own commitments to standing up against Islamophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination. So, as we kind of conclude this presentation, I just encourage each and every one of you to think about, how do you plan on standing up against Islamophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination in your community? Think about that. Think about what you want to do, how you want to organize, because really, it really does just take participating in a presentation like tonight, being, training yourself to deliver these types of workshops yourself, and finding like-minded people who are willing to do that work with you. So I really thank each and every one of you for joining us. We'll see you at the next Countering Cyber Hate workshop. I'm not sure when the date is for that. It's not here, but maybe Jasmine can share. And you will get a registration email in your inbox. And if you want to contact any of us, here's all of our information. To reach out to us. I've sent several of you already my email directly, but here it is as well for everyone. Jasmine's is there, Firdaus is there. Certainly we will be in touch with you, and make sure to follow the Canadian Council of Muslim Women on all of their social media platforms, including TikTok, which is amazing. And I'm always amazed about TikTok. So hopefully that's been great. And what we can do now is conclude. And if there's any sort of final questions, I can take a peek. But maybe Jasmine, did you want to say anything about the next Countering Cyber Hate or Firdaus workshop?
Yes, thank you, Amira. I think that was an excellent session. Again, apologies, it's been a long Saturday evening, but I think it was great learning, and especially in today's times, when every week we are hearing of something, it is our responsibility to know more about the issue, own it actually, and then counter it. So I again thank you for being there. So just our next session is more delving into countering cyber hate. So we had in our breakout session, we spoke briefly about the online hate legislation, but Dr. Barbara Perry, who Amira has kindly referred to, is going to kind of take on that session. She's going to present. And we are really going to delve deep into what cyber hate is all about, how hate has transcended from our streets to the online platform, especially for our youth and young women, and what can we do about it. So it's July 24th, 1 to 4 p.m. EST. Same thing, daretobeaware.ca is the website where you can register for this workshop. And just to add that this is going to be our final workshop in English, for the summer. We do have French workshops that will be taking place in August. And really, we are going to bring all the participants together. So all of you that have taken this training but are really interested in training your own community members, I seriously feel that this conversation is just a beginning. Like Amira mentioned, it is the beginning of all great conversations. It should not stop here. It should be something that you can take this training on into your inner communities. You could be part of a mosque, you could be part of an organization, a school, a university, and we want this dialogue to continue. So we will bring you together by way of focus groups late August, early September, and you really don't have to do a very detailed presentation if you don't want to. You just have to mobilize your community, bring them together via Zoom session, and depending on the COVID guidelines, of course, and really talk to them, a meaningful conversation as to what is happening in your communities, how can you help, and how can you not be that bystander, right? Like how can you be that active participant, that soldier, to say that, we will not let hate, racism, and Islamophobia spoil our communities. So, that is really proactive. So you should hear back from us within a few weeks. All those who are attending both sessions will also receive the certificate in digital anti-racism education. And you have my information. Do reach out to me. So a few people in the call or in the chat did mention that they have some great ideas as to how they would like to take the training into their own communities. So I feel that don't wait until the focus groups. Do reach out, do email me. It's firdaus.ali@ccmw.com, and we will really work with you to support you through these trainings. So I thank you, and I thank Amira for doing a wonderful job and supporting our team. And I just hand it over to Nuzhat. Before I do that, I also have a sincere thank you to the Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Vancouver, and Saskatchewan chapters of CCMW who have worked with me very, very tirelessly to get the numbers that we wanted. So we wanted 100 participants today. I think we have achieved our goal. So thank you, Naseem, Yasmin, and anybody else who's on this call for making this happen. So I turn it back to Nuzhat.
Thank you, Firdaus. And first of all, my heartfelt gratitude to Amira for for coming forward and helping us deliver these workshops. This was our last Anti-Islamophobia 101 workshop, and each one, I just said, oh, this is one of the best workshops I've been at. So you did us proud every single time. And we're really grateful to you for making the time. Your depth of knowledge and your insights really helped make these workshops a grand success, in my humble opinion. So thank you. And inshallah, this is not the last time we're going to see you. We're going to be seeing you at the French one too. And of course, we'll continue our work together. And also, I wanted to thank Firdaus and the team that's playing behind the scenes, Jasmine, Zainab, who've been here on this particular workshop. And Firdaus worked really, really tirelessly to get the numbers out with the chapters. And the chapters, congratulations, all the Western chapters from Winnipeg, from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. You did an outstanding job of meeting our goal of 100 people. So hopefully now you've got a whole bunch of people who are eager to go and share this learning with their communities, and we're there to help you do that. I hope I didn't forget anyone. Did I forget anyone? I always tell people that, with my gray hair, you can see I've been having many seniors moments lately, and I forget things. So please don't feel shy. Remind me if I have forgotten something. And then please attend our Countering Cyber Hate workshop with Dr. Barbara Perry on July the 24th, because it's sort of a companion to this workshop, because there are some really practical learning. There's practical learning around online hate and how to counter that. So please attend, and then you'll get an amazing, beautiful looking certificate after you've completed both of these workshops. Another incentive for you to attend. And this is not the last time we're going to see you. We're going to meet you in August or September for the focus group. In the meantime, please stay in touch with us and give us feedback on anything that we can improve on with respect to these workshops. Thank you.
Question, please.
Sure, go ahead.
So my understanding of the workshop, we would be receiving training, and the training is enhanced by the presentations of the different things that were shared.
Yes.
The material. Will we be having access to that material when we do our own workshops?
Absolutely. So what you will get is everything you just saw that Amira presented, you will have. Plus you'll have speaking notes. And all of the materials will be provided to you, including a training manual that you will receive that will contain a lot of details on everything from facilitating the workshop to other logistical details. Firdaus, jump in if I've missed anything.
Yes, so and besides the presentation, so we know that the presentation is really intense and we don't expect you to present the entire presentation. So you could choose or, take select slides that you feel are really important for your community. You could talk on the intersectionality or gendered Islamophobia. We leave it up to you. We also have a recording that we will share with you of both workshops, Anti-Islamophobia and Countering Cyber Hate. So we really leave it up to you. Use the presentation, have a conversation. We're there to guide you. So just stay tuned. We should be sending you an email in the coming weeks about the focus groups where we will have a chance to interact, to learn more about who are the communities that we are reaching out to and how to do it to the best ability that we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So I'd like to end. I don't think there are any other questions. It's a late night. So thank you again for being with us, being so patient. You're a wonderful community, and I'm hoping that you will help us to, eliminate Islamophobia, hate, and racism from our community. So
before we go, I just have something exciting to share. Okay. Someone that I met at a camp for Muslim children 41 years ago just said, "Are you the same Auntie Nuzhat that I met at Camp al-Momineen in 1980? Yes, I am the same one." So you see how we can reconnect on these. Salam.
I'm a Sultan here. I'm a Camp al-Mu'mineen alumni from 1989 till 1997, I think, or 98.
And I know Nina is not on today, but Nina is one of the, well, everybody knows Nina from the camp. So she's our president now, by the way. So, CCMW and all of us never leave each other. We always find one another. It's really nice to reconnect with you, Sultan and Mona.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your night, everybody. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you.
Great presentation, Amira. Beautiful. Very nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Firdaus and Nuz.